It's a hot one out there, and I certainly hope that the City of Toronto opens the cooling centers. I haven't gotten an email for those folks who are living outside on the streets. It's going to be brutal. Anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit about mutual aid. I've been thinking and writing about it recently as part of a larger project. So, mutual aid the term has been used to describe the redistribution of resources from those who have resources to those without. And, in my own context, I'm particularly thinking about outreach praxis, like Voices for Unhoused Liberation. The baseline of our praxis was to, bring harm reduction, clothes, snacks, and food, and know your rights literature to the shelter to distribute. We also had tents and camping gear that we supplied for people. Any requests that people came to us with, we would try to fulfill as best we could. And I'm thinking like the term mutual aid, I became aware of it kind of through the Occupy movement and the Hurricane Sandy situation, where neighbors and activists were really working together to make sure everybody was safe, and there was some repair going on, I think, and just supplying whatever people need to deal with the impacts of the hurricane and survive at the same time. Also, the other example of mutual aid was during COVID, and I did a lot of classic mutual aid during COVID, bringing groceries to community members who were having to stay inside, and mobilizing, like getting donations to buy groceries and bringing them around to different people, and accessing other organizations, and bringing PPE and all of those things. And it was interesting to be in a place of only doing that because we couldn't gather to do anymore. But that was of the moment, and really in and of itself, it's not enough. So mutual aid is often said to sort of prefigure a future society based on care. I think that's sort of the political core of it. But to me, mutual aid efforts that I see around me look a lot closer to charity. In the most obvious level, the flow is one way from the resourced, or those who are able to acquire resources, to the resource deprived, and the focus being on the material aspects of that flow, monetary or material. And Marxists have critiqued such projects as doing the work that the state should be doing. We pay taxes, the people pay taxes, and that money is supposed to go to services for people to maintain our lives and participate in society and whatnot. And of course, the government doesn't do that. And so this Marxist view sees groups doing material relief as offsetting low wages, high cost of living, and the withdrawal of the state from its welfare functions under neoliberalism. So in that sense, Marxists see mutual aid as fitting kind of neatly into the neoliberal agenda. An example of this is under George Bush Jr., when they were cutting back on welfare. And one of the things he was saying is that the community care should be done by faith-based organizations. And that's like the classic charity model. I see an incredible number of mutual aid requests, as well as fundraisers for large institutions like hospitals, universities, and other schools, research, and notably like food banks and shelters and all of these types of institutions. The food banks are serving record numbers of people as the economy worsens for folks. And I have put out calls for funds myself. Not that Voices for Unhoused Liberation, the group I work with, has received much of anything, but much appreciation to those few folks who do regularly donate to our work. And I think it's also worth mentioning that quite a few people who have donated to our work have been people with lived experience of being unhoused or who are currently unhoused. So that's kind of interesting. In our field of poverty, homelessness, the demands are increasing for public support. For myself, I'm low on money, so I'm not really able to participate consistently in the mutual aid community practice. If I have excess money or I receive money for something, I will always donate a portion of it, but particularly to Indigenous, trans, unhoused folks who I prioritize. But honestly, it's difficult to be faced with so many requests that I can't really respond to, which is not in any way to say that these requests should not be out there. They absolutely should be. But when I think about it critically, and by that I mean analytically from a liberatory perspective, with the neoliberal withdrawal of the welfare state, mutual aid puts a lot of pressure on a relatively resource-depleted community while letting the medium to big money holders continue to give or deny funds on their own terms, as usual. Mutual aid is, for people with disposable income. At the same time, Indigenous and Black writers have pointed out that what is called mutual aid today is actually something that communities of survival have always done in a much more complex and multi-dimensional way. And I think always about the Black Panthers. To me, they are the standout historical example of building a community based on care with their survival programs, a term I much prefer to mutual aid. But anyways, and I'm sure there are many other lesser known examples from around the world of poor people's community organizing together to survive, and also to develop an analysis of the politics of their condition, which was really what the Black Panthers were using this survival programs to have political conversations with people. Folks in poor and marginalized and unhoused community may not send an e-transfer in response to a post on Instagram, but sharing resources is a cultural and basic survival practice. It's a solid street ethic. And Marx would call the work of the Black Panthers, who are now reconstituted, I understand, as social reproduction. That is the unpaid labor that people do in order to sustain themselves, their communities, their chosen and bio families. While mutual aid refers to the community based on redistribution of funds, social reproduction refers to the unpaid labor that community members do. So it's different, potentially connected. While I'm not able to participate in a lot of mutual aid, I do an intense amount of social reproduction labor. Most of my life I've been channeling my energies towards social reproduction labor because it's the most meaningful labor that a person can do, in my view. And so do those in the unhoused community, which I talk about social reproduction labor of the unhoused, poor and unhoused community in my work. You can access that on my Substack, Revolutionary Notes on the Undeserving Poor. I'll link it. But social reproduction is a sacred, deeply meaningful, and political labor. I think because social reproduction is a term that refers originally and is most popularly used in a feminized context of home care, rearing children, maintaining the home, doing some kinds of community work. At the worst end of that, you can sort of think about the prohibition and what were those ladies called who are always trying to get people to stop drinking. But, in modern terms, it encompasses just like all the unpaid labor that women do to sustain themselves, their families, primarily their children and their community. Mutual aid, on the other hand, sheds a spotlight on those who need and those who have. But I feel like the mutuality of this relationship is kind of unclear. If you're sending an e-transfer, then what you receive in return is kind of a feel-good vibe. Giving money is super important. Money rules. But if you're actually engaged in community, you learn a fuck of a lot about poor people's lived realities, cultures, and analyses. The teachings of poor people about the society we live in cannot really be compensated for enough, in my opinion. If you're not engaged in community, mutual aid by e-transfer depoliticizes relationships across difference and replicates dependency on the excess income and or like goodwill of individuals. When the economy goes down as it is now, so does the mutual aid. Suddenly the mutuality is over and the aid turned out to be just that. In the end, like charity, giving is a way to excuse other responsibilities to address oppression and liberate our relations from the violence of colonial capitalist social structures of privilege and oppression. In trying to create radical community practice in the space where the welfare state has been withdrawn, mutual aid glamorizes the hardships of neoliberalism and distracts from the increased social reproduction labor that poor communities are forced to do. Social reproduction, on the other hand, sheds a light on the survival labor of poor oppressed peoples. It sees the labor that people do. That is, we are not cast as needy. We are cast as agents who support our communities against the state who seek our death. For these reasons, I don't see mutual aid as being a political program in and of itself. I'm not saying don't do mutual aid. Please do it. Redistribution is vitally important. But in order for mutual aid to be political, as in revolutionary, there needs to be an additional layer of political action or a context of political action. Mutual aid needs to be part of a larger movement and not be mistaken as political organizing in and of itself. So I think, like with Voices, for instance, we did mutual aid as the base layer. Then we built community with people. We shared knowledge with folks in the shelter system. Out of that shared knowledge, we developed demands, and then we took the demands to the shelter and to the city. And when they didn't respond to our demands, we escalated and we took action. We did disruptions, we did protests, we did like a sleepover protest in front of City Hall. We disrupted some fundraising events. Unfortunately, this makes Voices in some ways not that fundable, and like right now we're incapacitated due to some very unfortunate things that happened among the activist community. We're all precarious in Voices right now, so we've had to deal with our own survival issues, and we just don't have the money to continue to operate the way that we did before. So it's really a shame. Anyways, those are my thoughts on mutual aid. In and of itself, it's not going to liberate us. The next video I'm going to make is about money. Often mutual aid is a request for money, so I'm going to talk about money in my next video. Thanks for watching.